Out of all the videos I've done in regards to deer hunting, I want to say that this is one of my, if not my most critical video. It's a video that if I was my younger self, I would be paying attention to this particular video. And what I want to talk about today is essentially timing and when to go after a specific buck or one of your hit lister bucks. Because I think there are some people out there who they have a hard time reeling themselves in a little bit. And the reason this video came to be is that right now I have some of my bow hunting buddies who are getting on my case because it's 2 weeks into the Wisconsin archery season and yours truly has not been out in the deer woods with a bow yet. And I've had a lot of stuff going on right now. I released a product. We'll talk about that in a different video. But with everything going on and what my cell cams have been showing me, I'm deciding to hold off. And this is a system essentially that I built in a few years back already, and it's worked well for me. So let's go into the system of timing when to go after that specific buck. Now, if you're new to the channel, you are going to know right now that I hunt public land and I hunt knock-on-door permission properties. I have 11 properties, actually, that I can hunt. I wouldn't say any of the properties are anything overly special. Matter of fact, most of them are roughly around 10 to 15 acres. I even have some properties that are 3 acres. And when I say 3 acres, I don't mean the actual woods is 3 acres. I have 3 acres nestled into a bigger area. And the reason I mention that is because this plays a part in going after specific bucks. The public land is always nice because you can roam, from one end to the other, and you can play a little bit more cat and mouse with these bucks. I'll call them mature shooter buck. But when it comes to some of these small properties that I have permission to hunt, the cat and mouse game is pretty much a game of setting the mouse trap and waiting for that particular buck to come into the mouse trap and then when to spring it. Now, what I want to talk about is the way I started off hunting back in my teens and in my 20s. We're talking the late 80s and early 90s when I started bow hunting. And, at that time, I knew that I had to come up with a type of a system. And the system I came up with is really the opposite of what I do today. And what I did for a while really didn't work. Now, I did shoot some nice bucks when I was younger. And a lot of that I would associate with, the rut and sitting in funnels. And I could have had some bigger bucks if I could take what I know today and applied it to my earlier self back when. So the plan that I had is that when I was younger, I would take a particular property, and actually I had permission to hunt an 80-acre property all to myself. Very fortunate, had that property for about 7-8 years. And this particular property, how I would hunt it is I would start out on the ends and I would slowly work my way into the bedding area. And the bedding area was situated right into the middle of this property. And my idea at the time was thinking that, I'm going to keep hitting different spots. And eventually that big buck that I spotted from an observation point or glassing from the vehicle, we didn't have cell cameras back then, that he was going to make a mistake. And eventually they're going to make a mistake. I'm going to capitalize on it. The problem with that thinking is that I was giving them a heads up as I started to kind of bounce around on the property. And in my mind, what I was going to do is I was going to squeeze that tighter, and eventually I was going to create essentially a sanctuary. At least that's what I told myself. And by the time I squeezed down and got into the sanctuary or close to the sanctuary, the game was already over. I already had maybe 10, 11, 12 hunts in on a particular buck, and he knew what was going on. Now, when you play that kind of game, the odds are, I made those bucks or that particular buck that I was after nocturnal, or I bumped him onto the neighbor's property. I did that for probably maybe 6-7 years. And that was the system that I had built in. Prior to that, it was just basically sitting in random spots. And I knew that I needed a system. And eventually, this isn't working for me. There's got to be something different. And that's when I started to do more quality sits over quantity sits. And I needed to get that patience. And that's the other thing that I try to mention to some of these young hunters is to have patience, and not the patience of sitting for 4 hours, 5 hours, or all day sits on the deer stand. The patience is to be able to hold off from actually going after a specific buck and waiting for all of these variables to come together. And I credit this to getting the bull buck, the archery buck that I got last year. You can see that buck on my video on Oak and Iron Outdoors. If you just go down on the link, I'll put the link below. But a lot of it has to come down to timing and when to go after them. Now, currently, I have bucks, 3 essentially what I'll call shooter bucks that I'm after. And the problem is that none of them are giving me daylight photos yet. So I had to create a new system, something that was going to work. And it's kind of funny, when you find something that doesn't work, sometimes you just do the opposite of what didn't work. And in this case, it was more quality sits, less hunting, and wow, did that make a huge difference. Now, one of the things I want to mention is essentially scent, and I know some of you folks are going to disagree with me on this, and that's fine. And I can't prove it per se, but from cell cameras, from watching deer in the deer woods, when you're in an area, I've seen a lot of these huge bucks. I'm talking your mature whitetails. It takes 2 to 3 weeks before they come back to an area that you've been to. I just feel that you just can't randomly go out in the woods and leaving your human scent all over. And I also believe your human scent accumulates when you sit in a particular spot. And even if you're in a tree stand 15, 20 feet up in the air, your human scent is accumulating in a particular area. Another thing that I believe in is what I like to call terminal scent areas, or terminal scent trails. Essentially what that is when you walk a particular spot and you stop. So for instance, let's just say that you are checking a trail camera, putting up a trail camera, or you're putting up, let's say, a mock scrape, and you go from that particular spot straight back to where you came from. That is a cause of alarm for deer, because they're the reason why the predator stopped right here. Why did that predator stop? Where I found out, if you can continue your trail in a loop or in a circle, even if it's a small loop or small circle, you want to be walking even further into the deer woods where you don't have to leave more scent. That does help with your scent per se. And let's talk about, when do we go after a specific buck? And for me, I need a couple of factors that come into play, and I also have to be able to be one step ahead of them. So one mistake that I see a lot of bow hunters make is that they become reactive, meaning that they hunt an area when they see the sign pop up. And matter of fact, I'm one of the few, I want to say, that I really don't care a lot about deer sign. I care more about topography and the way the deer utilize a piece of property. And I do want to touch real quick on when not to go after them. And that's the mistake that I see a lot of hunters making. This is something I've seen my current bow hunting buddies are doing. And I'm not here to tell them what to do. And it's, their license, their tag. But, we've had a lot of warm weather here in Wisconsin. And I don't mean warm, I'm talking mid to upper 80s. And the conditions just have not been what I would call right to go after some of these big bucks. Now, here's the thing. You're going to tell me, Clint, guess what? There's a lot of people right now that are out. I've gotten a lot of big bucks in the back of the trucks already here in Wisconsin. And, if you have the intel to say that, hey, go after that big buck, do so. Go after him. If the intel is telling you that he's showing up in daylight, coming to that apple tree, or let's say you have a mock scrape, food plot, a food source somewhere, or you're getting close to their buck bed, whatever it might be, and you have the intel to go after him, go after him. And you might be the individual that you just want to go out and you want to hunt. You don't care what anybody says. Go out and hunt, and go out and hunt if that's what you really enjoy doing. But for me, I'm very specific on when I go after specific deer. So for me, I'm trying to eliminate, or what I do is I try to eliminate the bad days, because every time I go out on a bad day, or a day that doesn't really line up with a big buck moving, I'm leaving my scent down, and I'm giving them a heads up like I did when I was younger. And I don't want to do that. I want to catch them completely off guard, and I am extremely focused on virgin sits. A lot of my spots that I have, I only sit that particular spot once a year, maybe twice a year if I can stretch it out, and that's it. And if I have to sit that same property in close to, I will move 75, 100 yards over. It's hard for me to put up permanent stands because it's kind of a waste of money for me. That's why I like my mobile setup. I have a Lone Wolf custom gear stand, the 0.75 actually, that I utilize quite a bit, and an old Lone Wolf Alpha Climber. And for me, it's all about being mobile to catch them completely off guard, and maybe even where you were previously sitting. So what I want to focus right now though on is the part as far as being active and not being reactive in going after a specific buck. Now, a lot of bow hunters, when I talk to them, what I can tell is that they are reactive. They go in the deer woods and they see that sign come up. You know, they see those fresh rubs or they see those fresh scrapes made. And yes, you can shoot bucks off of those. I definitely have, because sometimes they will come back, especially to some of those scrapes that are out there. But the thing of it is, that sign was already made. That was already done. And this is why I am a huge proponent of doing your early season scouting and really getting to know your properties. And I believe this just takes experience, but understanding land topography and how deer utilize land topography. And I can take certain property that I have learned the topography on, and I can go to a brand new property somewhere else. And what I learned over here on this particular property will apply over to another property. And where I'm going with this is that there is going to be a time frame here, at least in Wisconsin, and that's right around that October 15th to October 18th time frame, where these shooter bucks, these big mature whitetails, are going to start popping out, and they're going to start popping out in daylight, is what I'm trying to say, and they're going to start making their rubs, and they're going to start putting their scrapes in. And what I've learned is that there are historical spots that I've hunted, and I can find these particular spots on other topography on when they're going to start doing that. And the key is to be one step ahead, not reactive, but essentially proactive. So what I like to do is I'll sit back if I'm not getting any intel, whether it's glassing or we can shine here in Wisconsin at night, or of course cell cams. I have particular areas that I know these big bucks will show back up over time, and even it might not even be a specific buck that I am aware of or have history of. I just know that, you know, on October 15th, 16th, 17th, or 18th, they like to create rubs on this little corner of cedars or aspen. So in doing so, I'm looking for particular conditions to line up with that time frame when these big mature bucks start putting their sign down. And once again, here in Wisconsin, that's that October 15th, that October 18th, even 19th time frame where they put their initial sign down for the pre-rut. Now, this isn't including putting their, you know, rubs on trees to get the velvet off in August or September, and some of the other little rituals that, you know, a lot of bucks do. This is when they start really marking their territories, absolutely for sure, for the upcoming rut. What I'm looking for then during this time frame is I'm looking for that cold snap, like I think everybody does, and I also look for low humidity. And I mentioned this in prior videos. I do believe humidity plays a very big role in deer movement, and I think it's an underrated component of deer movement. And I've been writing and studying a lot of different temperatures and winds and humidity, especially for the area that I hunt. And humidity, from what I found out in my studies, does play a big role. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for essentially the recipe of low humidity, cool temps, and then the historical data of areas that these mature big bucks like to show up to and make their initial rubs and scrapes for the rut. And that to me is one of the key components as far as the timing goes, or the first part of timing when to go after these big bucks. Now, one of the nice things is that you're going to go in, you're just being proactive now. You're trying to get them as they're going to make the rub or the scrape, because a lot of rubs that these big bucks do, a lot of times they don't come back to them. You know, I've seen many times where bucks will lay down a rub line and that will be it for the entire season. So I'm going to these particular areas right in that time frame here in Wisconsin. If you're other states here in the U.S., that can move forward and back. But I like to call it the pre-rut time frame, the beginning of the pre-rut, the pre-rut, and that's where I'm setting up and trying to get one of these mature whitetails that I'm after, especially if it's a target buck. Now I do create mock scrapes. And the mock scrapes are another way of having a buck repeat coming to a particular area, especially, the areas I hunt, especially with a lot of the pressure that's going on. It's evening, evening, evening. But I've noticed right around that time frame, once again, if I get a cool spell here, at that October 15th, October 19th time frame, low humidity, I'm heading in to go after them. And I may not even have a picture or video of the last, let's say, 4, 5, 6, 7 days of him in the area. I'm just playing my cards that he's going to land on that. And you'd be surprised at how many times those deer will land on that particular week if you utilize cell cameras or even SD pole cameras. So timing going forward. So, okay, let's throw out that week. All right. You now have the rest of the pre-rut, and then we're going to get into the rut, when to go after a buck during that time period. And the next part of the timing perspective is watching your mock scrapes. I use mock scrapes a lot on my cameras. So what I've noticed in regards to watching cell cams and time spent in the deer woods is that if you utilize mock scrapes, it seems like during that pre-rut, and especially the rut time frame, if you get them on one day, you'll notice, okay, they're gone, they're gone, they're gone. Right around that 5 to 6 days later, they tend to make a comeback. Now, one thing I want to clarify is that, if a buck comes to a mock scrape and Clint says you can come back in 5 or 6 days, and he doesn't come back in 5 or 6 days, that I'm wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the odds are, and we always play the game of odds. Nothing is ever a sure thing in the deer woods. But what I've seen, at least on my mock scrapes, utilizing cell cameras, is 5 to 6 days later, they like to make that return visit. And this also plays a part on why you should mark down and write down the conditions of that particular day, the first time you came by, or the first couple of times you came by. Because you'll notice that if you get those same conditions again, the same wind 5 or 6 days later, they like to then all of a sudden show up again 5 or 6 days later if those conditions mimic the first time that he showed up. As you know, the rut happens. And when the rut happens, that particular buck that you were after, that you saw on camera in August, September, early parts of October, he disappears. And that's just the way it goes sometimes. And you have to basically have enough patience to get them to come back maybe in that later part of the rut. So a lot of times in the later part of the rut, they start to show back up again, assuming that they didn't get it by somebody else. And you may have to then change, your hit list and be a little bit more open to other bucks that are in the area. So that's one thing that you really do have to kind of keep an eye on as far as, when to go after a specific buck. Because if you do wait too long, you're taking that chance that he's going to leave your area and he's going to look for hot doe somewhere else. And you're like, Clint, I got to hunt. Well, now's the time to go out then and hit up that public land. Or let's say you have maybe another property somewhere that's got a lot of does on it, and cell cam or your SD pole cam is not showing any shooter bucks on it. Go out there and take a doe right now. But the key for me, though, once again, this is for me. I'm not saying this is what you have to do. I am waiting for that right time to go after a particular buck. You don't want to give them any heads up that you're after them. You get your intel, you do your homework, and you try to get as much information as possible. And then you're able to take that information, see if there are tendencies that buck is slipping up on. And we can do that now with cell cams. We weren't able to do that 25, 30 years ago. And you take that intel and you take the best guesstimate according to when he moves, how he moves, where he's moving to, and then of course the weather, the wind, the thermals, and all those goodies, and then in particularly the landscape. The landscape, I truly believe, plays a very vital role also when going after a specific target buck. And I know I didn't give away any prime examples of topography. This video could be 2-3 hours long. If I did that, I don't want to do that. But hopefully it makes you think. The goal here is to help you think about the way you've hunted in the past. and to hopefully maybe create a little more patience and wait for the timing of a specific buck. And yes, you take that chance of somebody else getting him. You take that chance of a car or truck hitting him, especially as the rut ramps up. These are all chances that we have to take. And if you think about it, it's playing the game of odds. Do I wait? Do I go now? But for me, I need the stars essentially to line up the best that they can. But I'm not going to wait too long either, though. I got to make moves on particular bucks. And for me, when I have certain aspects, like I mentioned earlier in the video, when they line up or are close to lining up, that's when I go after them. And a lot of times too, we strike out and he doesn't show, or he's maybe out too far. But you'd be surprised that when you get your intel, you do your homework and you wait to that specific time when you know that he's going to come through. That's when you go after him. And for me, that's helped get some of these bucks on the wall back here, specifically on public land. So hopefully this video has helped some of you folks out. I know it's been a while. I'm going to create a lot of videos here going forward. And then once again, I'll talk about, that new product that essentially I just released, or new products actually. So until next time, Clint from Oak and Iron Outdoors.